Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH2503 Community Media Production, and this is an overview of the topics that we're going to cover in the latest of our lectures, which is Lecture 8, and the title for this lecture is The Great Disruption. And what I want to cover in this lecture is some of the more general global challenges that we face, if you like, that have the potential to change in quite significant ways the kind of economies, the standard of living, and the kind of mindsets that the Western developed societies have become secure with over the last 50 years. I've done the PowerPoint presentation for this. There's a few video clips that I want to show, and there's quite a few diagrams as well, so I'll include them in the notes which I've posted to the DMU wiki, so the DMU Commons wiki. So if you go to the TECH2503 page, you can access these, you download them via the lecture notes section. So the kind of issues that we're going to cover is, in the first instance, the kind of sense of global insecurity. That kind of is pervasive. It's common in the media to hear stories about climate change and the increase in global temperatures, the decrease in things like polar ice, record levels of kind of ice melt this year. We're thinking about global economic insecurity based around a new mood of protectionism and a lack of collaboration, the extended levels of inequality, so the kind of free trade agreements that have left many people behind and have not provided for a standard of living that's been distributed in an equitable way. And then the kind of lack of resilience that communities feel for dealing with change, or have for dealing with change, because we've become a much more kind of hollowed out monocultural form of society with, ironically, less diversity and less diversity of thinking. So we've become kind of centralised and bureaucratised around kind of simple notions of efficiency, rather than looking for cultural diversity and the innovation and creativity. So what we want to look at is kind of some of the background thinking about this, and I've used the chapter in the Stephen Moore book, the Pragmatic Sustainability book. I've used the chapter, which I think is chapter 4, which is Getting Ready for the Great Disruption by, I think it's Tom Fisher. And it's an interesting chapter to use because he brings together some ideas from the kind of climate change discussion and the environmental discussion, also brings them with the kind of ideas about community development that we've covered. So issues about sustainability or resilience as two models that kind of can contribute towards future provision of our society, but do so in very different ways. So one is the sustainability model, where we underpin it with resources, and one is the resilience model, where we look to what people do themselves to change the way that people contribute and use their own resources. And so it's the difference between, if you like, a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach, the kind of grassroots approach. So we're going to look at this in the sense of what he does in the chapter is he brings the idea of kind of design, and he uses architecture as a model of kind of holistic design that takes the principles of design practice and it applies it to the process of developing community and social resources. So using design as a way of thinking about how we can further extend and better the living conditions in which we share. Rather than kind of imposing a sense of design on people, he argues for the sense that design is something which should feed up through people and with people. So we'll look at some ideas about that, and then we'll look at some ideas he raises, so if you like, very definitely philosophical questions, and he relates this back to the ancient Greeks, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. And what he talks about, he asks the question really, which is the basic fundamental question that's occupied people in the West at least for 4,000 years. How should we live? On what basis can we imagine a better tomorrow than the circumstances that we have today? And it's kind of like a question of thinking about our responsibilities and the relationships that we have in our communities. So the search for community is very important within this. And again, I think there's an idea that community media can really occupy some of this ground and facilitate change and community interrelations and resilience. And what he does, he relates this to the pragmatic model, which we've used through these lectures, which kind of underpins the idea that there isn't, if you like, we have to look to ourselves for answers, and we have to look to our time for answers. There are no timeless answers. There are no answers that go beyond our own experience. These things change and are shaped by our experience and founded within our experience. So we're looking at this in the way that perspectives shift and change over time, but how they're grounded in human experience rather than, if you like, a meta story that's held externally to our experience. So we'll look at this, and the idea really that kind of a sense of belonging and a sense of empathy is what drives a sense of community, and what drives, and how do we foster that sense of empathy in a world which is so obviously faced with so many challenges. And I think that the idea, this is, we're reaching what Malcolm Gladwell calls, and I'll talk about this in the lecture, a tipping point. A point where we can no longer go back to the old ideas. We can only go forward into some new environment. And perhaps the elections and the referendums of this year indicate to us that we've arrived at a tipping point where things have got to change. But the question is, in which way do they change? Do we pull into ourselves and become regressive, or do we look outward and become progressive? So these are the kind of challenges that we'll think about. I'll throw in hopefully some illustrations and some video clips that might lighten the load, as it were. So see you on Thursday at the lecture, and if you want to read the notes in advance and have a look at the chapter in advance, that would be really helpful. So I'll see you later.